Yo, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. On this episode we're looking at a game that was part of Xbox Game Pass and has gone on to be regarded as one of 2022's worst releases. It was intended to be a return to form for the franchise that up until this lay dormant for nearly 20 years, so hearing a new entry was coming sounded awesome. But can nostalgia carry this game even with what it gets right? We're talking about GunGrave G.O.R.E, developed by Iggymob and published by Prime Matter, releasing to the PlayStation and Xbox platforms along with PC in November of 2022. This third-person shooter had some hype around it, and the first two entries I remember being decent, though I haven't played either in a few years. You'd think a similar formula with a new coat of paint ought to be good, right? Though this falters a bit, you can still have an alright time, granted you're patient enough to get through its 31 stages. So before we get into this one, let's catch up on the story so far. You mainly play the role of Grave, the ultimate killing machine with a penchant for dual-wielded pistols and an arsenal-filled coffin upon his back. Seed is a street drug that steals the souls of users, which is on track to be distributed worldwide by the Raven Clan, until an organization steps in to halt its production. You'll battle through Scumland and eventually throughout regions of Asia like Singapore, Cambodia, and Hong Kong. Your goal is to band together with the hunters and stop Seed from spreading one bullet at a time. Gameplay wise, you've got a 3D third-person shooter, hack and slash hybrid, where you'll fire your pistols as fast as your fingers will allow. Up until this was patched, each shot was linked to pulling the triggers on the controllers without an auto-fire function. With 31 stages to blast through, if you play this before that update, chances are your hands got work trying to run this. However, you do have a versatile system of attacks and upgrades which you'll unlock with higher beat counts and art scores for downing multiple enemies with your special attacks. You can free fire your pistols and use a lock-on which can shift between targets, along with a charge shot that can break the shields of tougher enemies. The charge requires you to hold the fire button for a few seconds, and sometimes the inputs just seem to miss, especially in heated situations. Once you see a blue light start to glow, you know the timing is right before using this. Special attacks, also known as demolition shots from the previous games, are back and can be acquired at the end of each mission if you have enough points available. Getting higher combos and art scores net you more points to buy items and upgrades, and just about all the attacks from the original are here with a handful of extras. Combos are going to get you the most points either through chaining kills and destroying environmental items to using your demolition shots at just the right time to maximize damage. You've got your death hook which pulls enemies to you or slings you to them quickly, closing attack distance. You've also got your coffin on your back which has a variety of uses, mainly deflecting projectiles back at your ops. This mechanic is going to be very important fairly early on in the game, and while you get instructions on items, sometimes it's still a little unclear exactly how some of your items and attacks work. While deflecting projectiles, you can't move. Moving will phase items through the coffin, causing it to miss and hit you. Staying still, however, will basically connect every time and send projectiles back roughly where they came from. Not having the hang of this will bring you to one of many dead ends on a gondola where you have a steady barrage of missiles and enemy fire coming at you, all of which knock you back off the platform into the hazards below, which is an instant death. You've got OG Castlevania style knockback here when hit by missiles, so mind the gaps during those firefights. There's also a fair bit of platforming between stages, and these sections aren't too bad overall, but believe me, you're going to get smoked a few hundred times with some of the jumps here since it's on the floaty side. With the three characters you'll play as during the game's runtime, Grave has the most difficult platforming segments and is the slowest of the three. While it can be done depending on how you take to the controls, these bits can get a little tricky. You'll periodically switch between Grave, Bungie, and Quartz, which is an all melee build. While you can't switch on the fly, each series of levels will switch the perspective of their part of the story with a mission or two, and then transition back over to Grave. The Bungie sections were pretty sick overall, and was a nice callback to Overdose, which also have revolving characters. Now this on paper sounds like it'd be pretty awesome, right? Well, there's a catch, at least from the build on its initial launch. This has some gnarly difficulty spikes that just pummel you for a while, complemented by levels where you can just demolish everything feeling nearly invincible. While the difficulty can be managed depending on interest, some just might not make it through all 31 stages for this reason alone. Interesting part is, the boss encounters weren't as difficult compared to the path getting there. In addition to that, there were just some inexplicable deaths in this game where at times I'd have full health and full overshield to just get instantly melted. Stage 6 had a segment where a shotgunner jumps into the fight and just claps you no matter what your health says. If it's intentional programming or potential bugs from the release build, it just stuck out as strange considering that nowhere else in the game did it happen quite like this. So be aware there's going to be parts of this game that many will likely find frustrating, either through clumsy programming or seemingly just the dirt of luck. Enemies will roll up in masses here, and aside from a few types, you'll see the same ones a lot, so you'll just adjust your attacks accordingly when they come at you to attack, except for when they just slap you out of nowhere and just can't seem to do much about it. There's also a bit on the top of a train where it has a lot of hazards as you run towards the train's upper cars, and staying and fighting is the fast way to get smoked here, while just running forward and letting the hazards do the work for you, dispatching your enemies, seem like an effective way to get around it with enough time to do what you need to do. The gameplay in general does have its moments where it feels good, but then it has others where it feels broken, so the balance just wasn't quite there. Graphics wise, GunGrave G.O.R.E is running on the Unreal 4 engine, and this is a bit of a mixed bag with some high and low lights. With the sheer amount of stages broken up amongst the tour, you're going to see a lot of areas that look the same. While they have slight variations like being ground based or rooftops, it's going to look samey before long. To its defense, there are some level designs that do look pretty sick here, especially once you get into Scumland and Hong Kong. The outdoor levels in Cambodia and Vietnam are a nice change of pace, even though the sections of that start to look similar too. This game now has fully 3D animated cutscenes instead of the well-established hand-drawn cutscenes from the original and Overdose, and it looks pretty decent overall while not exactly mind-blowing. There's also a lot of cutscenes here, and it's a healthy chunk of the game's runtime. In-game graphics also look relatively smooth in the 3D space, which is mostly destructible, and it's a way to keep combos going between clearing rooms and enemies. Environments do get claustrophobic in parts and often have multiple traps and blockades, though these do eventually open up into more arenas. Enemies, as mentioned earlier, do have a variety of designs, but after a point will repeat with the exception of boss characters, which are the game's main attraction. Boss characters have short intros before each encounter, and the animation style here reminds me of the Final Fantasy movie Spirits Within a bit. The boss encounters will feel and look very familiar for hack and slash fans, and has all the commonalities you'd expect. The HUD is also a direct callback to the previous games, with the skull giving gesture commentary, all in high definition. Character models also look relatively good here with some cool design work while simultaneously looking dated for a new release. It works well enough here, but the graphics, while more modern than its past entries, aren't anything over the top compared to what we've seen before in the series. That seemed to be the common theme here, being that for things that looked really good, there were things that just looked kinda bland. Overall, it's not a bad looking game, but it does feel dated. Coming from a fan of the franchise, you'd think something that's been dormant for nearly 20 years would push things a little bit more, or maybe pare down of having so much of it and refining it to a smaller handful instead. The main difference between this and the past entries is that they're significantly shorter, clocking in around 2 to 5 hours each, whereas G.O.R.E, depending on how quick you can get through it, is about 10 and plus hours, with a lot of it feeling like filler unfortunately. This would have greatly benefited from having a bit less chaff on several fronts visually. Sound-wise, this is one of the stronger suits here, with the effects and music being pretty alright. Wailing guitars and distorted dubstep bass lines are common style tunes you'll hear throughout the game's runtime, with a handful of atmospheric tracks to balance things out between each frantic encounter. As far as the soundtrack, there's a decent amount of variety between tracks, switching the vibe often. Sound effects are also pretty crunchy here, with some really nice bass with the demolition shots and explosions, which all hit with a thunderous crash, deleting your ops. Your pistols rarely stop firing, and the punch and feedback are solid. The voice acting, depending on which selected language, has had mixed reviews as far as delivery, but the Japanese language track seemed okay. There's a lot of voice lines from enemies and supporting characters, while Graves says very little. The story itself keeps you moving through the game, but isn't anything overly deep. As it all develops, the narrative and delivery are interesting enough to keep you invested and plays out about how you'd expect. Altogether, the sound department is a saving grace as far as the overall scope of the game, though depending on regional audio, you're getting varied delivery as far as the voice acting. The background arrangements, however, remain steady as a solid baseline for this composition. To be fair, I went into this one with memories of the first two games in mind, and somehow was feeling like even with the technological advances of G.O.R.E, the past titles just made more sense and somehow felt better. While this is far from the worst thing I've played in a while, this one will mainly appeal to longtime fans of the source material. There's some rad gameplay in here, but the loop might overstay its welcome for some. Once and if you max out Grave, beyond the platforming, the gameplay is likely going to feel repetitive. I was juiced when I heard a new GunGrave intro was coming after all this time being dormant, though bummed just to get an kind of alright reintroduction to it. This one might be the ticket for some if you want some arcadey, guns blazing, hack and slash style action, though be prepared for a bit of a slog since it's literally 3 to 6 times as long as the past two entries. If you're a fan of the series, I'd say try it on Game Pass, but for newcomers that are unfamiliar, there's a lot of games that do this a lot better these days, from indies to major titles. Not to say I didn't enjoy bits of it, just saying this one might not be for everyone despite what it does get right. GunGrave G.O.R.E gets a 5.5 out of 10, and this one I really wanted to be more hyped on, but just wasn't even after pressing through the campaign. This one does have some high notes when the action is fresh, but the loop does eventually get stale, unfortunately. The gameplay itself, coupled with its revamped presentation, can be seen as good or bad depending on where your stance lay in the franchise, but it's not the worst third-person shooter out there. Even if it doesn't quite hit like the OGs, the heart is still there. While it's currently on Xbox Game Pass, it's $50 otherwise, so if this looks interesting to you, I'd say wait for it to go on sale if you're looking for a physical copy. And if you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you use it as a resource. Check back often, we'll have more reviews and commentaries coming in the near future, but until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.